All the kids are literally put cookies and milk out for Santa because he's bringing, gifts for them. To blow him up over the skies of Moscow, I mean, it just shows you the mentality, the dark mentality, the violent mentality inside of Russia.
Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. I am joined today by Olga Lautman, our resident Russia expert. Anytime we need insight into what's going on. And she wrote a brilliant Substack piece on her Substack thread, Unmasking Russia, about this propaganda video that I assume the Russian military, I'm not sure who put it out, Olga, you can inform us, but it was a video. You know what? Let's roll the clip. It's so outrageous that I can't really describe it. You have to see it for yourself. Here it is.
Ho, ho, ho! Hi, Russians! Here are your presents! Happy New Year! Holy shit! Все?
Все. Цель уничтожена.
Правильно. Не нужно нам ничего иностранного в нашем небе. С Новым годом!
И тебя, дед. Всех с Новым годом.
Olga, it appears that Santa is, I guess, too Western for Russia. They're shooting anything out of the sky. I mean, it was obvious in the video that this is a propaganda piece. He's delivering NATO missiles, right? You can see that in the back of the sleigh. But this speaks to something much deeper and much broader, which is their all-out assault on supposed Western influence, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I've watched a lot of propaganda over my life. I did not expect Santa to be shot down by a surface-to-air missile over the skies of Moscow. And I mean, the release of the video was timed, I mean, coincidentally, but it was timed right after Russia shot down the Azerbaijani flight. So the actor in the clip had to come out and say, this video had nothing to do with Azerbaijan flight. This was taped in the fall. And I mean, this video came out 2 weeks after a Russian activist, a Kremlin activist, filed with the prosecutor's office in Russia to label Santa a foreign agent. And this just goes to the mindset of Russia. And this is what I have been talking about for decades, that, the West took their victory lap. Yes, we won the Cold War, but the Russians still have that sentiment. And they frankly despise the West. They want to destroy everything. And I mean, in the video, you see, Russia's Ded Moroz, who comes out and he's like, oh, target is destroyed. We don't want anything foreign. They could have simply mocked Santa. They could have done something to compare their Ded Moroz versus, Santa. But no, they had to violently destroy him. And it goes to what they're doing across the West. They want to destroy democracy. They want to destroy freedoms. They want to destroy our culture. Anything that represents the West, they want destroyed. And they've shown it themselves. I mean, you see all the sabotage attacks across Europe. You see, all the attacks on, in the US and across Europe with elections and basically overthrowing the democratic system.
Their violent approach towards disrupting democratic processes and just the democratic way of life in the West isn't limited to disinformation and their troll farms and things like that. It's in some cases kinetic. They're actually cutting cables, right, in the North Sea. They're cutting telecommunications and power cables. I think it was between Finland and Estonia. They are poisoning dissidents, chemical warfare. I mean, honest to God, chemical warfare, killing Russian dissidents in the UK and elsewhere, more than likely. It feels like the Cold War for Russia never really ended.
It didn't, and this is where the West made a mistake, because when the KGB collapsed, they went under the surface. By the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, they managed to get approximately $50 billion out of the Soviet Union, anticipating a collapse, in order to rebuild. And then it got rebuilt into basically the FSB and SBR, while Westerners were coming into Russia in the early 90s with suitcases of cash and trying to, install a capitalist system. The Russians were basically using this to compromise Westerners, so the security services, while we were training Russians how to, have a democracy inside of Russia by inviting them to various universities and centers and, doing training for, how democracy runs, how to combat corruption. They were infiltrating our universities, our centers, in order to then co-opt these people to turn them against our own countries. And this goes to a bigger thing because, the system in Russia for centuries, it's a security state system. Putin right now is the symbol, but what drives me the most crazy out of everything is that people don't understand that, it's not Putin who created the system. Putin is a symptom of the system. The system is the ones who created the likes of Stalin and Putin and Brezhnev. And even if Putin should, his regime should be overthrown or should he die, the system will continue. They might put a democratic leader, and the West is so desperate for a democratic leader that, FSB is already preparing the perfect democratic leader to basically show the West, look, we're a democracy now, post Putin. Eventually he will die. And it will be the same thing as what happened in the 90s. And this goes to the bigger point that the Russians, we should not expect them to have a democratic system. And frankly, when they decide to have one, whether it's in this lifetime or a century away from now, it needs to, be their own decision, not something that the United States or that Europe should push on them, because we already saw what happened. And the Santa video, as hilarious as it is, as demonic as it is, you're taking a symbol that makes children around the world happy. All the kids are literally put cookies and milk out for Santa because he's bringing, gifts for them. To blow him up over the skies of Moscow, it just shows you the mentality, the dark mentality, the violent mentality inside of Russia.
Especially releasing that literally days after they blew an airliner out of the sky with so many fatalities. It was a surface-to-air missile that shot down a civilian airliner. I read recently, I'm going to fact check this, but one of the leading causes of fatalities now in commercial aviation is Russian missiles. When you look at the number of accidents or intentional targets, it's just horrific.
It's Ken Harbaugh. Quick break here to let you know that we'd love to hear from you. Your comments, suggestions, thoughts about future topics and guests. Email us at info@thekenharbaughshow.com and make sure to rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, and back to the show.
Olga, I don't think most people in the West can really appreciate what you mean when you say the security state. So I want to dive into that a little bit more, because when we think of power centers in the US or in the West, we think, in our best moments, we think of Congress and the executive branch. In our worst moments, we think of corporations and the media and things like that. But in Russia, it is very different. It is shadowy. It's invisible. The power lies and the decisions are made in areas that we don't really appreciate as Westerners, and it is incredibly persistent. It has outlasted leader after leader after leader in Russia. And so I want you to explain what you mean when you say that Putin is just a symptom. It is a security state in the sense that the FSB, the inheritor of the KGB, has been pulling the strings for generations.
Absolutely. I mean, it starts even with Okhrana under the Tsars. I mean, people at the time went to, the Orthodox Church, and you had the priests who were monitoring the people to make sure that no one steps out of line with the state. No one, questions whether the Tsar is ordained and, delivered by God. And then it went into NKVD, and then, it had a bunch of changes in names, but it's always been the same. And basically, with the security state, every facet is controlled by security services, from who the leader is to what oligarchs have businesses. And this is another thing that has driven me nuts, that, Western companies did business, with Russia's oligarchs, thinking that these are normal business people. Because in America, in Europe, if someone is the CEO of an organization, they are not working at the direction of the CIA. They're working at the direction of themselves. There, anyone, whether they're a pasta maker, have a company that makes pasta. I mean, they are working at the, at the direction of the security services. So, for instance, when you take all the, famous Deripaska, Avin, Friedman, and others who have, basically stolen the money and resources from the state and then cuts it with the Kremlin, when they are directed to come into the West and do business, at the same time, they're collecting information on Westerners. They're compromising Westerners. They're delivering all this information back to the security state, and to the security services. They're, they have the charity events here. They're carrying out influence operations, hijacking universities like Blavatnik with his, Blavatnik, whatever, schools everywhere. Think tank centers. And I mean, they're at the same time not only collecting information, they're also peddling Russia's soft propaganda, undermining the West. And that's it. Now, if they do not do this, then they will be at risk of, suddenly 1990s criminal charges being filed, and they lose everything. Same thing with Twitter. I mean, Elon Musk, a company that invested with Twitter. It was, I believe, Avin's son and another oligarch's son who were involved in Twitter. People here said, oh, well, they're independent. There's no such thing as independent. If you're the child of an oligarch and living in California, if you don't carry out the services of what Russia wants you to do, your family will be arrested. You might be thrown out a window. I mean, there are certain rules with a security state, and you must abide by them, because if you don't, then you end up losing everything, including up to your life.
And there are plenty of examples of this. This isn't weird paranoia. I mean, they can take your companies, Khodorkovsky, or they can, poke you with a poison-tipped umbrella. Or, in the case of the FSB defectors, they can kill you with a radiological weapon. They have done this repeatedly in places like the UK. And wealth doesn't protect you. The shelter of a foreign government doesn't protect you. I mean, the lawlessness of the modern Russian state is breathtaking, and we seem to be asleep to it.
Yeah, and since 2022, because I document, all the people who mysteriously died, since 2022, since the full-scale invasion, I mean, we're upwards of now probably 60 plus deaths, everything from falling out a window to toad poison to, falling off a balcony overseas.
What kind of poison did you say?
Toad. One senior deputy of a gas company died from toad poison because
that doesn't seem accidental.
No. And they and then Lugavoy, you mentioned, the chemical use. Lugavoy, who's a Duma member, he assassinated Litvinenko with polonium in the UK. And he recently, I believe it was in January of this year, put out a call because Russia has stepped up their operations to go after anyone speaking out against Russia overseas. He put out a call that if you are criticizing the motherland, we will hunt you down. You will either die of a drug overdose, you will die like a dog, or you will, disappear, just disappear. I mean, so there, and Medvedev, who, the West sold us as a reformer, he's a former switcheroo prime minister, president, puppet. He also put out a warning exactly a year ago, threatening people, and he said, whoever speaks out against the motherland, we have, ways of finding these people and dealing with them and making sure, to silence them. So, I mean, you have Russian officials who are outright threatening assassinations across, and we've had several poisonings of prominent people in U.S., Russian dissidents who run think tank centers, speaking out and working on Russia's issues. And they were poisoned, whether it's Germany, whether it's, Estonia, Latvia. I mean, this is happening pretty much on a monthly basis.
Yeah, we have to talk about Ukraine. What is your assessment briefly of the current state, but more importantly, of their ability to prepare for a second Trump term?
Well, before we get into Trump, my warning and what I have been warning is that Trump admires this type of state, the one that Russia has and that the Soviet Union has had. He goes back to the Soviet Union, his affinity for this type of a power state, and he wants to bring it here. As far as Ukraine, look, Ukrainians are going to continue to fight. Even if there's a temporary ceasefire achieved, which I highly doubt, because I mean the Russians right now are mocking Trump to the point that they are even like treating Elon Musk as the president. They joined into that chorus. Even if something is achieved, it'll be temporary. Ukraine and Russia have been at war for, I would say, a good part of the century, if not more centuries. Russia has always, at one point or another, invaded Ukraine. I mean, this is not their first go around. Stalin committed genocide against Ukrainians, and during Holodomor, where he killed like millions of Ukrainians from a man-made famine. So Ukrainians will continue to fight. They understand historically, they know what is at risk. They understand, that if they stop, whether it's, even for a year, that the chances are that, Russia will, once they regroup, they will launch another attack. So as far as with inside of Ukraine, they've already kind of, understood that the U.S. is no longer can be counted on. And now it's up to Europe and up to Ukrainians to continue fighting and doing what they can do. And Europe needs to step up, their game, because Europe, unfortunately, with the U.S. half-ass assisting Ukraine, even though they gave so many weapons, but they had so many delays in fear of, angering the Kremlin, that these delays ended up in Russia, fortifying their positions on the front line. I mean, while, Germany and U.S. were arguing, should we give tanks? Is this a red line? Russians ended up, sweeping through towns, but taking more towns and making very solid fortifications on the front. I mean, so these delays had a lot of damage to begin with. So, I mean, Ukrainians have been fighting. They're grateful for everything that the U.S. has done. But at the same time, the U.S. and, particularly Germany, they're basically withholding of equipment when needed. And then on top of it, that whole debacle with the speaker, when we lost the Speaker of the House, and Ukrainian aid was paused for 6 months, so they didn't have any weapons. This caused a lot of setbacks for Ukraine, but they will continue fighting. Right now, they're calculating on the U.S. exiting the scene. They're not going to settle with any kind of agreement. Trump has mentioned that he wants European peacekeepers to go into Ukraine to basically guard the front line and make sure that Russia's doesn't move further. At the same time, the Russians are already preparing that, if peacekeepers from Europe come in onto the front lines, that they're basically preparing to launch a war on Russia itself. So Russia's not going to agree to that. So, I'm, looking forward to how Trump is solving this in 24 hours. But whatever happens, as long as Ukrainian sovereign territory is occupied, Ukraine's national security will be at risk. We saw this in 2014. Russia invaded and annexed Crimea. They turned it into a military base. Russia would not have been able to launch a full-scale invasion had they not had Crimea and held parts of Donbass, where they moved in military equipment, Iskander missiles, you name it, it was moved into Crimea and Donbass. So, even if they hold on to the front lines are frozen, where Russia right now currently occupies, this still is going to continue, as a national security threat for Ukraine, whether it's in a year, 2 years, 5 years.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I'm afraid you and I will be talking about this quite a bit in the months and years to come. I'm headed back in March, so we'll be reporting from the front again. Olga, great as always having you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.